There has been an unbroken chain of Jewish history in Israel from the time of Abraham to the present day. And to say otherwise is deliberately to ignore history and to promote a false narrative that the Jews stole the land and Israel as a nation is illegitimate. Welcome to Israel Unveiled. There are few issues today that are as filled with false information, distortions, and outright lies than those about Israel and its government. Sadly, all of it leads to delegitimization and an isolation of the nation from the world community. So what's the truth? Well, I've actually had that question asked of me many times over the years. It's a reasonable question, and it deserves a reasoned response. Honestly, too much of what is presented as accurate information goes unchallenged. Actually, that's the reason why I originally thought to do a podcast, is to unmask much of the lies and the distortions that surround the nation of Israel and its people. So I want to help provide some facts, and in the process, I hope that I'll be able to address and expose some of the lies that I consider are the most significant. The number one issue I want to address deals with the lie that Israel stole the land from the Palestinians. After the Romans conquered the land of Israel in 135 AD, all but a remnant of the Jews were dispersed from the land. But there's never been a time when Palestine, as it was named by the Romans, was ever devoid of Jews. The Jewish connection to the land predated the Arab-Palestinian connection by thousands of years. For the last 1900 years, the land was inhabited by Christians, by Jews, different Arab tribes, Samaritans, the Druze people, even remnant of some Canaanite peoples. A modern-day mass movement of the Jews back to their ancient homeland began about 150 years ago. Beginning in the 1880, Jews from Russia who were escaping the increased persecution bought land from absentee landowners in Damascus at inflated prices, and they settled in collective farming settlements. Arab Palestinian nationalism began to flicker about 100 years ago. In 1936, the British government set up a government inquiry, and it was called the Peel Commission, and it was to study Palestine. And they were then to go on to publish a report of their findings in 1937. I want to read to you a bit of what they wrote in their findings. And it's found on page 11 and page 12 of that report. And I'm quoting, "And the same devotion to the land of Israel, Eretz Israel, the same sense of exile from it permeates Jewish secular thought." And it goes on to say, "Nor has the link been merely spiritual or intellectual. Always, or almost always, since the fall of the Jewish state, some Jews have been living in Palestine. Under Arab rule, there were substantial Jewish communities in the chief towns. Safed, which according to Jewish tradition contained as many as 15,000 Jews, in the 16th century, and it became a center of rabbinical learning and exercised a profound influence on Jewish thought throughout the diaspora. That was the area that was the dispersion of the Jews back in 135 AD by the Romans. That's what it was called. And it went on to say, but small though their numbers were, the continued existence of those Jews in Palestine meant much to all Jewry. White House correspondent and author Bill Koenig wrote this, and I'm quoting, "Only the Jewish presence remained consistent as the sole survivors in the land, and they alone have maintained an uninterrupted national link ever since Abraham and Isaac. The number of Jews may have been minute at times, but they have remained regardless." In 1947, in the UN Resolution 181, it recommended that Palestine be partitioned into a Jewish state and an Arab state, and Jerusalem would remain and be placed under international supervision. Now, the Jewish leaders agreed to that, and the Arab leaders rejected it. They obviously had no interest in living side by side with the Jewish state. There has been an unbroken chain of Jewish history in Israel from the time of Abraham to the present day. And to say otherwise is deliberately to ignore history and to promote a false narrative that the Jews stole the land and Israel as a nation is illegitimate. It's a lie. The second lie that I would like to speak to is that Arabs living in Israel have no rights and are persecuted by the government. Arabs are a minority in Israel. They are a population of 21%. But even though that they're a minority, they have full citizenship rights with voting rights. And they have government representation in all branches of government. There are Arabs who serve in the Knesset. That's the legislative body of Israel. And today, in 2025, there are members of 3 Arab political parties that serve in the Knesset. Israeli Arabs have held high-level ministry posts as ambassadors, as well as serving on the Supreme Court. There are 400,000 Arab children in public schools, and Arabic, like Hebrew, is an official language in Israel. Sadly, many Arabs refuse to become citizens because of their hopes of having a separate Palestinian state. Others are concerned who would want to become citizens. They're concerned about the community reaction if they chose to go that route. Interesting enough, in times where negotiations look like there might be a Palestinian state formed, and more recently that occurred under Abbas and former Prime Minister Olmert, the media verified that when it looked like there would be a Palestinian state formed after all, the media verified a rush by Palestinian Arabs flooding to City Hall to apply for Israeli citizenship. And the reason, they said, is that they didn't want to live under a corrupt, what they saw as a corrupt Palestinian government. So to say that Arabs living in Israel have no rights and are persecuted by an Israeli government is a lie that needs to be unmasked. The third lie is that there has not been an opportunity for a Palestinian state. And I think of all of the things and all of the lies that are perpetuated, that's the easiest and the most obvious to unmask. After the 1967 war, the Six-Day War, had ended, victorious Israel offered to return the land that had been won in that war back to the Arab nations. Incredibly, later that year, as 8 Arab leaders met in a summit in Khartoum, Sudan, they declared no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, and no negotiations with Israel. It's often referred to as the 3 no's of Khartoum. In 2000, U.S. President Clinton hosted meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat. And at that summit, the Palestinians were offered the most generous offer to date: 96% of the West Bank and 100% of the Gaza Strip, along with billions of dollars that would be given to help build an infrastructure of a new Palestinian state. You know, I remember this very well because at the time we were in Israel when this was happening. Unbelievably, Yasser Arafat rejected that offer. And finally, in 2008, in September, a series of meetings that was hosted by U.S. President George W. Bush and was held with Palestinian Authority leader Mahmoud Abbas and Prime Minister Olmert, it ended the possibility of 2 states. When Abbas never returned to the negotiating table, in which the most generous offer in history was made to the Palestinians. So the claim that there's never been an opportunity for a Palestinian state is an absolute lie, and it's easily refuted. The 4th great lie, that Israel is responsible for the refugee problem, is also something that can be historically proven to be false. On May 7th in 1948, in accordance with a set timetable by the UN, the British moved out of Palestine. And in the days preceding that, Arab leaders from 5 Arab armies in 5 Arab states were encouraging the people, the Arab Palestinians who were living in that area, to evacuate temporarily, they said, because it would make it easier for their armies to be able to come in and attack and drive the Jews into the sea once the British left. And so what happened is thousands and thousands of Arabs believed them. They believed that they could return to their homes. And as they listened to those Arab leaders, that not only would they be able to return after just a couple of weeks because the Jews would be defeated, but in addition, they could share in the spoils, all that the Jews would be leaving behind. Well, those armies did attack Israel. The day after the British left, the Jewish people declared the Jewish state. The War of Independence ended with a victory for the new Jewish state. You see, the 5 Arab armies did attack, but Israel was victorious. History shows that the losers were the Palestinians in all of that. They'd believed the false promises of those Arab leaders, and now they were being kept as refugees in camps, controlled for the first 19 years by the Jordanians. It's so ironic. They were now refugees in the very same land that had been offered them through the UN resolution. Surrounding Arab nations refused to welcome them, and even refusing to allow them to buy land. And instead, they would be kept for political propaganda purposes to garner world sympathy and angst and anger against Israel. Literally, billions of dollars have flowed into the areas where graft and corruption has allowed leadership and their families to live in a luxurious lifestyle. The world now knows in recent months that billions of dollars were also spent in Gaza to build a labyrinth of tunnels to attack Israel. Their leadership of the Palestinians, both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, have much to gain personally in keeping the refugee problem from being solved. An article on Fox News Online in 2023 titled Hamas Billionaires, Lifestyle of the Rich and Terrorists, Private Jets, Cushy Hotels, How Hamas Bosses Live in Luxury. And it was written by Eric Shawn, who was he was reporting on the graft and the corruption, and he wrote this: the terror group is estimated to earn more than $1 billion a year from a global network that includes cryptocurrency, real estate, legitimate businesses, and taxing and extorting Gaza residents. Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh is reported to be a billionaire worth $4 billion. Khaled Mashal, who is the leader of Hamas, is estimated to be worth over $5 billion. Dr. Musa Abu Marzouk, the number 2 man in Hamas, is reportedly worth $3 billion. These men have become wealthy as they have siphoned off billions of dollars in foreign aid that was meant for the people of Gaza. Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas of the PLO likewise has become very wealthy, as he's followed in the footsteps of Chairman Yasser Arafat, who died a billionaire. The continuation of the refugee problem is not at the fault of Israel. It is the result of a corrupt Palestinian leadership and its refusal to accept any one of the multiple opportunities to establish an independent Arab state. But it remains a lie that's repeated over and over and over, and it's a propaganda tool to stir emotions, to discredit Israel, and to hide the truth of a corrupt Palestinian leadership who use the people as pawns in a terrible game of control and power. You know, there's so much more that I could say about anti-Israel lies, but I've tried to choose the ones I feel are most significant that the enemy uses to breed this misunderstanding and hatred of both the Jewish people and the state of Israel. You know, as Christians, we have a responsibility to recognize and to unmask lies. The Word of God warns us against being deceived, and I want to end with a scripture that I think really addresses this well. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Isaiah 5, verse 20. We're called to walk in the light, to accurately communicate truth, and to pray for fulfillment of all that God has promised yet to be realized for Israel and for the Jewish people. If you have found this podcast interesting and enlightening, I hope that you would click like and share, and also that you would consider subscribing to it. Thank you for listening. Be blessed, and shalom.